Before I start sharing my story, it's important to mention that in the middle of it, there's a response from my son that helps clarify what really happened. It's crucial to watch the whole story so you can fully understand the wrong choices I made, choices that ultimately ruined my once happy family. My life took a drastic turn when my husband discovered that I was cheating on him with my boss. This revelation led to a shocking confrontation, resulting in my husband going to prison for assault. Now, 7 long years later, he is back in the world while I find myself completely alone. My children harbor deep resentment towards me, and I constantly grapple with the feeling that I am a selfish person. Every night, as I sit in the silence of my empty home, those thoughts echo in my mind, reminding me of my failures. My children aren't here, my ex-husband has every reason to despise me, and my immediate family is torn apart because of my actions. The weight of self-loathing is something I can't shake off, and I've been haunted by my mistakes since that fateful event in 2015. At that time, I had just turned 39, and it's clear now that I took my ex-husband for granted. He had always been there for me, affirming my beauty daily, wanting to be intimate, and treating me as his equal. He never placed me on a pedestal as a queen or a princess. Instead, he considered me his partner in life. We had been together for 20 years, having met in high school, both of us each other's only love. Our relationship felt solid, and my family adored him. My brother looked up to him as a role model, and he was the person everyone turned to when they faced hardships, always ready to help and support others. He was truly a good man. Together, we raised 2 strong-willed boys, who were 18 and 16 at the time, along with 13-year-old twin girls. As the years went on, I started to struggle with my self-image. I gained weight and often felt insecure about my body. Despite this, my husband would express his admiration for my appearance, reassuring me of my beauty. Our conflicts were infrequent, and when they did arise, they usually revolved around intimacy, something I was unwilling to engage in. It wasn't that I didn't want to, I simply wasn't in the mood, and he was respectful of that. When I turned 39, I decided to change my lifestyle and dedicated myself to exercising, including yoga and Pilates. After an entire year of hard work, I transformed my body from 180 pounds down to 135. It was a significant accomplishment for me, as I had always considered myself to be on the heavier side. My ex-husband joined me in this fitness journey, albeit not as consistently, managing to lose weight himself from 260 to 225. He was starting to reshape his body, and his attraction towards me grew stronger. Even after 2 decades together, he still looked at me with a glimmer of desire, something any woman would envy. However, despite his unwavering affection, I found myself mentally distant from him, and that desire was absent on my part. At that time, I suspected I might be experiencing early menopause, as our sexual encounters had dwindled to maybe 2 or 3 each month. He desired more, but no matter how hard he tried to connect with me, I just wasn't interested. He suggested couples counseling, but I turned him down flat. It was at this juncture that my selfishness reared its ugly head. A new manager started working at my office shortly after my birthday. He was younger and undeniably attractive, and for reasons I still struggle to understand, he began to show an interest in me. Initially, I brushed it off, keeping my distance, but over time, our interactions shifted from ignoring one another to engaging in light conversations. His flirting became more frequent, and although I made it clear that I was married by showing him my wedding ring, I eventually found myself flirting back after 2 months. As I think back, I realize now that this was the beginning of an emotional affair. At the time, I felt exhilarated by the attention, which clouded my judgment. My ex-husband sensed something was amiss and confronted me about it, leading to a heated argument between us. During that confrontation, when he leaned in to kiss me, I subconsciously recoiled, not out of disdain for him, but rather because my mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the new manager. The disgust I felt had nothing to do with my husband, it was a self-loathing reaction that I later grappled with. A week after that argument, I arranged to meet the new manager at a cafe, intending to end the flirtation. I wanted to tell him to stop pursuing me, to insist that I can't continue down this path. However, I was unaware of how entangled I was about to become in a web of deception that would shatter my family. Before I could gather my thoughts and say anything to him, he leaned in and kissed me. At that moment, my mind went completely blank. This was the start of our 6-month affair, a time filled with intense emotions and actions that would change everything. During our time together, I found myself engaging in activities with him that my ex had always wanted but I had resisted. I was eager and willing, always in the mood, perhaps because this relationship felt fresh and exciting. With my ex, things had become routine. We did have sex during this period, but not nearly as often as before. As time went on, I began to push my ex away. I nitpicked at the smallest things he did. I even belittled him, which fills me with shame. I didn't understand the impact of my actions until my brother visited me one day. He revealed that my ex had confided in him about feeling depressed and was considering a separation. My ex felt unloved and was starting to fall out of love with me. Hearing this was a wake-up call. It made me see clearly what I was doing wrong, so I made a decision. I ended the affair, quit my job, and resolved to show my husband the love and attention he deserved. I wanted to fix what I had broken and be a better wife. Not long after, my affair partner showed up at my house with a box containing my office belongings that I had requested to be shipped. We talked briefly, and he wanted to know what had gone wrong between us. I told him that I needed to focus on my marriage and that he had to leave. But he asked for one last encounter, and despite my better judgment, I agreed. We went to the guest room, and we lost ourselves in the moment. I don't know how long we were together, but suddenly, while he was on top of me, I felt him jerk back violently, accompanied by a loud bang. I sat up in shock to see my ex staring at us, his expression a mix of rage and heartbreak. My affair partner fell to the floor, and there was a significant hole in the wall. I attempted to say something to my ex, but his eyes were bloodshot from tears, and he was trembling with pain. I felt a surge of disgust for what I had done. My affair partner stood up and tried to escape, but my ex confronted him. I remember shouting at my ex to stop, desperate to defuse the situation, and in a moment of panic, I leaped onto my ex's back. This resulted in me being forcefully slammed to the ground. For a while, everything became hazy, and sounds around me turned muffled. When I finally regained my senses, my ex had my affair partner pinned on the floor, and he was on the phone. All I could do was stare at my affair partner's swollen face and the blood on the floor beside him. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door, and I watched as my ex put the phone on speaker and set it down. He then dropped to his knees, placing his hands behind his head. The door burst open, and police officers rushed in to handcuff my ex, while paramedics followed closely behind. I later learned he had called 911 on himself. Everything spiraled out of control. At the hospital, my father didn't say a word, he simply looked at me with disappointment and shame. My brother was furious, yelling at me, crushed by the weight of what I had done to my ex. My mother tried to comfort me, but her attempts only ignited further anger from my father. My ex's family was livid, his sisters threatened me, and his parents looked as though they wanted to exact their own form of justice. I approached my children, but they turned away from me, unable to even look me in the eyes. My sons wouldn't speak to me, and my daughters did the same. Meanwhile, my affair partner was severely injured, requiring reconstructive surgery on his face due to the brutal confrontation. While at the hospital, a woman stormed into my room and attacked me. My brother had to pull her off. To my dismay, I learned she was my affair partner's wife, someone I had no idea existed. He had never worn a ring or mentioned his marriage, which only deepened my feelings of guilt and shame. As the trial approached, my boys stayed with their grandparents on my husband's side, and my daughters continued to refuse any contact with me. My ex didn't want to see me either. I attempted to visit him at the county facility, but my efforts were denied. My brother made sure my ex was sent to the correctional institution where he worked, allowing him to keep a close watch. When I begged my brother to pass along a message to my ex, he told me to go to hell. The trial was the first time in months that I laid eyes on him. The anger in his gaze cut deep, and it hurt more than anything I have ever experienced. The emotional fallout from my choices was far-reaching, and I was left to confront the devastation I had caused. I saw him that day, and it was like a punch to the gut. The look he gave me was filled with such raw anger that it hurt more than anything I had ever felt before. It was a stark contrast to the way he usually looked at me, with love, even during our arguments. But during the trial, that love was replaced by pure hatred, and it was overwhelming. I felt the need to excuse myself and hurried to the restroom, where I let the tears flow freely. Each day of the trial meant revisiting my affair, going through every painful detail in front of everyone. When I spoke about how long it lasted, I saw the crushed expression on my ex's face. My father, unable to bear it any longer, stood up and walked out of the courtroom. During my ex's testimony, I learned about the moment he came home to surprise me. He planned a romantic lunch and a weekend getaway to the Catskills, trying to create a perfect day. But instead, he walked in on a scene that shattered everything. He later recounted how he reacted when the other person, my affair partner, ordered him to step aside. In a moment of rage, he snapped and attacked him, only stopping when I was thrown aside. After that, he called 911, and hearing the recording in the courtroom was heart-wrenching. The pain in his voice, the sobs as he followed the operator's instructions, was unbearable. The other person was too drugged up to testify and couldn't speak, so the court showed images of his injuries. I felt sick to my stomach knowing I was responsible. My ex had done significant damage. He shattered the other man's eye socket, cheekbones, and even broke his jaw. The doctors explained there were bone fragments too tiny to piece back together. Because of this, my ex was charged with a third-degree felony and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The impact of the verdict was immediate and chaotic. My sons shouted in protest while my daughters and his family broke down in tears, their wails still echoing in my mind to this day. The first 3 months after the trial were torturous. My affair partner's wife filed a lawsuit against me for alienation of affection, and my ex filed for divorce. My eldest son moved out, the other son isolated himself in his room, and my twins were acting out. In the grocery store, my former sister-in-laws confronted me, and one even spat in my face when I tried to apologize to her. My father and brother cut off all communication with me. I faced a financial crisis, as I was forced to look for a new job. With no money coming in and my savings dwindling, I was practically blacklisted in my professional field due to the scandal, so I took a job in retail, working as a seasonal employee in a tax office during the rush. Every day, I was terrified of losing our home. My ex refused to let me visit him, and every letter I sent was returned unopened. It became a routine for me to cry in the shower out of despair. The strain took a toll on my parents' marriage. My mother defended me constantly, while my brother completely ignored my existence. Even my friends from childhood took sides, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated. The weight of my guilt pushed me to thoughts of disappearing entirely. Eventually, I sought help from a therapist. She harshly pointed out that I had grown too comfortable in my relationship with my ex. I didn't view him as my husband anymore but as a friend with benefits, and that realization hit hard. I had taken his love and commitment for granted. Nearly a year passed in silence from my children. When I cooked dinner, they would grab their plates and retreat to their rooms, avoiding any contact with me. I had several breakdowns, pleading with them to just say something, but there was nothing but silence in return. My brother's wedding arrived, and I wasn't invited, even though my kids were. I kept trying to visit my ex, hoping to be added to his visitor list, but I was constantly denied. My letters continued to come back to me, further deepening my depression. I knew I deserved the pain, but it didn't make it easier to bear. Then, unexpectedly, my brother came to my house one day. I was taken aback and felt a wave of happiness for the first time in months. But that joy quickly faded as he chastised me. He told me my ex had been stabbed in prison. Some inmate had attempted to sexually assault him, leading to a violent confrontation where my ex was hurt badly. My brother's words cut deep when he screamed that I had caused all of this before leaving in anger. The tears flowed for days afterward, and the truth stung. I realized that I had played a significant role in the unfolding nightmare. I attempted to visit my ex in the infirmary, but once again, my requests were denied. For 4 more long days, my sense of despair only deepened, feeling completely trapped by the consequences of my actions. For 4 long years, I faced constant denial. I made countless attempts to communicate, reaching out to him in various ways, but every letter I sent was returned unopened. Despite this painful silence, I found comfort in knowing that our children were still able to visit their father frequently. It was during these visits that I learned he had been placed in protective custody by my brother following the attack that changed everything for our family. As time passed, my eldest son chose to attend the same college as his father and pursued the same major, showing a connection that I couldn't fully understand. It was painful to see how he distanced himself from me, preferring to bond with his siblings instead. Holiday gatherings became a source of heartache, as my son chose to celebrate with his grandparents rather than come home. The patterns continued with my other son, who also attended the same college and followed suit by refusing to reach out to me. My twins, though challenging at times, maintained a routine of visiting their father weekly. It seemed to brighten their spirits, but their rebelliousness grew when they felt unsettled. They relied on their uncle to keep them in check, further emphasizing the split within our family. Communication between my brother and I remained strained. I even tried to visit his wife after they welcomed their first child, but I was asked to leave, which deepened my feelings of isolation. My mother kept me updated on my brother's family, but my own father's refusal to acknowledge me added to my sense of abandonment. In early May of this year, my children returned home, filling the house with energy and joy for 4 whole months. I was overjoyed to have them around again, and I tried everything I could think of to show them my remorse. Although I felt largely ignored, their willingness to engage in conversation made me incredibly happy. I learned about my eldest son's long-term relationship and my second son's involvement with the college track team. Miraculously, my daughters began to speak to me again, stirring up a mix of emotions within me. Watching them smile, laugh, and share meals together reminded me of all the moments we had lost, making me feel even more regretful about my past actions. As August approached, I started preparing for the twins' senior year, which also coincided with their 18th birthday. I was excited about throwing a birthday party for them and shared my plans, only for my daughters to express their desire to celebrate on a different day. This response left me confused because I thought our relationship was improving. When I inquired about their choice, one of my daughters revealed that their father was planning a party for them, and she didn't want me there. The shock of her words hit me hard, as I learned he had been released from custody at the end of April for good behavior. My heart sank as I realized that their happiness stemmed from having him back in their lives and not from any healing that I had hoped for us. I asked where he was staying, and they told me he was living with my brother. Desperate to communicate, I attempted to reach him by phone multiple times, but he refused to pick up. I decided to go to his house, clutching the letters I had written over the years. I caught a glimpse of him through the crack of a closed door. As I called his name, my brother instructed me to leave. I handed over the letters and walked away, feeling defeated. However, just as I reached the driveway, I heard his voice and turned around. He approached me, and tears streamed down my face as I reached out for a hug, but instead, he handed back my letters, coldly saying, "You forgot this." Watching him walk away shattered my heart further. I begged him to talk to me, but he simply turned his back and walked back inside the house. My children stood at the door, their eyes void of any warmth or love for me. In that moment, I realized they were only tolerating my presence. Despite the pain and rejection, I still yearned to fix our broken relationship. I wanted to apologize for my selfishness, to express how much I missed him, and to seek forgiveness for the damage I had caused to our family. Each day grew heavier, yet I pressed on, learning from my mother that my ex-husband's former wife had started visiting him 2 years ago. I didn't care about that, all I wanted was for him to forgive me and to feel his presence beside me once again. I longed for our children to be together with us, for everything to return to how it used to be. Deep down, I knew I didn't deserve redemption or a second chance. Even if some miracle allowed us to reunite, I realized it would never be the same again. The weight of my past selfishness tormented me, and I wished more than anything that I could take back the hurt I caused. I was selfish, and I truly wish I could turn back time and take it all back. This feeling comes as a response to a post made by my mother, where she stated that my selfishness ruined our family. I spend a lot of time on Reddit, often visiting the subreddit, Wayward, but I am using a throwaway account for this because I do not want anyone I know in my everyday life to connect this back to me. I work hard to keep my past hidden from my college friends. They have no idea that my dad was in prison, and I have no desire to share that information. Recently, as I walked around campus, I overheard many people discussing my mother's post and sharing it with one another. Hearing their words stirred up a lot of emotions that I thought I was beginning to overcome. Out of curiosity and frustration, I decided to look it up. Upon reading it, I quickly realized it was about my family, which only fueled my anger. I reached out to my mother to confront her about it, and of course, she began crying. In a moment of frustration, I yelled at her, expressing my feelings about the situation. Later, when I went to visit my dad, I told him about my angry exchange with her. He raised his voice at me, but it was only because I had cursed at my mother. My father is a good man, and he has always drilled into us the importance of respecting our parents. He tells me that while I may struggle to love my mother in the way I should, I need to show her respect. However, it is difficult to respect someone when they have done so much damage. My dad worked hard throughout his life, constantly reminding us to be grateful for growing up in an area where we were not targeted for our achievements or interests. He explained that in the South Bronx, where he grew up, things were much tougher. My aunts shared stories of how he had to join a gang at just 13 years old, primarily to keep others away from him while he focused on his schoolwork. When he turned 15, he lost his father to cancer. This tragedy forced him into a parental role for his 2 younger sisters because their family had no life insurance. He juggled jobs and education, doing whatever he could to keep food on the table and the rent paid. My dad often described how fortunate he was when his mother remarried a good man and they moved to upstate New York for a fresh start. From stories shared by my uncle, I learned that my dad was seen as out of place during the 90s. He would show up to school wearing baggy clothes and a shirt depicting the Puerto Rican flag, attracting teasing from others. What surprised everyone was my dad's response when he was confronted. Instead of backing down, he stood up for himself and fought back. But rather than hold a grudge afterward, he helped his opponents up, suggesting they hang out and skip school together to talk about things. This act showed them all that he was a decent person, and they quickly became friends. Soon after, he introduced them to my mom. They connected instantly, attending the same college, and by the end of their freshman year, they got married. While growing up, it was hard to miss how affectionate my parents were with each other. They were always holding hands, kissing, and acting like a young couple, which could be embarrassing at times. Even during my senior year, when a lot of things went wrong in our family, my dad still acted like a teenager around my mom. He loved her deeply and respected her, and I can truly say he never put her on a pedestal. He would often lecture me, saying that a woman won't respect a man who puts her above him because she will always look down on him. His own father and stepfather had instilled this idea in him. My dad taught me that treating your wife as an equal is crucial. She should be your best friend and your confidant, just as you are hers. My dad had his own unique traits. He was a big man, standing at 5 feet 11 inches and weighing around 260 pounds. Despite his size, he was quite active and always ready with a joke. One of my favorite memories is when he would sing to my mom. We all loved those moments. He would surprise her with flowers and leave little notes that said things like, "Just because it's Thursday and I was thinking about you." He even wrote her love letters and always stood up for her whenever someone was rude or disrespectful. My dad constantly reminded her how beautiful she was. Through his actions, he showed my sisters and me what kind of man we should seek in our own lives. When it came to my uncle, my dad was always there, ready to support him, even when others thought he was a lost cause. My dad never gave up, driven by my grandfather's words, "Knock the stupid out of him," which always made me laugh. He helped my uncle become the man he was meant to be. My dad taught me how a man, a friend, and a husband should act, and my mother. A husband is expected to be a source of support and love, as my mother once had for my dad before her affair. She always cherished him, and he stood by her side through thick and thin, encouraging her when she felt down and lifting her spirits when she needed it most. He was her biggest cheerleader, just as she was his. Their relationship appeared to be the ideal marriage that many of us aspired to have. However, everything changed when my mother began to stray. I distinctly recall the months leading up to the affair when she began speaking to my father as though he was somehow lesser than her. He tried to stand up for himself but often held back, maintaining his composure even in the face of her disrespect. Despite his accomplishments, including graduating from college and building a successful career as a financial advisor, my dad had a fiery side that could emerge in an instant, as my grandmother would often remark. He was fundamentally kind and respectful, resembling his own father in many ways, but he could also be fiercely protective and unyielding when pushed. My dad made a sincere effort to win her back. He bought her flowers and arranged dinners, even trying to take her out dancing, but she seemed to be lost in her own world, indifferent to his gestures. It was heartbreaking to witness the toll this was taking on our family, especially on my younger brother and twin sisters. Even amid the chaos, my dad would reassure us that everything would eventually be okay. He often suggested that my mother was merely stressed from work and that this was the reason for her behavior. I believed him, especially after she quit her job. I thought that perhaps stepping away from the stress would help her. However, the situation escalated when my dad was arrested. The shame and embarrassment that washed over us as rumors spread in our school about what had happened were unbearable. Knowing that my father was arrested because of my mother's actions felt like a betrayal. Unable to face my mother, I chose to stay with my grandmother. The sight of her made me feel physically sick. When I visited my dad in jail, I could see the shame etched on his face. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He expressed feelings of failure, as a husband and as a man, because, in his mind, he had not foreseen the consequences of his wife's infidelity. Despite my reassurances that he hadn't failed, he insisted that any man worth his salt would have considered the repercussions of such actions. The pain deepened when he admitted that his wife had betrayed him with another man. I begged him to look at me, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Then came the moment that shook our family to its core. My mother had the nerve to ask us for forgiveness for what had transpired. In that moment, a surge of anger coursed through me. For the first time in my life, I wanted to lash out at her. We were all hurting, and she was seeking forgiveness as if everything could just be mended with a few sincere words. Listening to that 911 call during the trial was the worst experience I had ever gone through. Those 25 minutes felt like an eternity as I listened to my father, a man who would have done anything for my mother, pleading for help, crying and telling the operator that he thought he had just killed someone. Hearing him express the devastation that the love of my life had inflicted upon him was more painful than I could ever describe. I recognized that my mother attempted to act as a character witness for my dad, despite the warnings from all of us not to do so. It was confusing to me. Why would she want to show the court that she still loved him? Her testimony, where she detailed how long she had been involved with another man, seemed to have been detrimental. It felt like it contributed to his downfall and led to his incarceration. I couldn't shake the feeling that if we had had a competent lawyer instead of a court-appointed one, my father might have been able to clear his name. This situation led to serious repercussions for all of us. I struggled with my anger, while my brother sought refuge in alcohol, and one of the twins grappled with suicidal thoughts. All of this while my mother remained oblivious, focused only on trying to fix what was broken with my dad. I felt a deep resentment towards her. When I started college, I wanted nothing to do with her. I took on the role of a parent for my siblings, balancing a full-time job, classes, and even sending her money to help with bills. I couldn't understand why she created the impression that she was managing everything by herself. I knew she was battling her own depression, but she had support, yet she acted as if she was completely alone. Grandma defended her, but only because everyone else was against her. This was what the twins believed anyway. Then came the day my dad was stabbed. It felt like my world shattered all over again. I had just seen him that day, joking about how muscular he had become in prison, playfully referring to it as the prison body plan. We shared a laugh that felt so light and carefree. Yet, everything changed when I got the phone call that would shake me to the core. I was driving back to school, and upon hearing the news, I nearly crashed my car because I felt like my mind just shut down. It was an unbearable time for everyone involved. I didn't tell anyone, but I found myself sitting outside the apartment, feeling utterly lost and helpless in a situation that felt like it was spiraling out of control. I really wanted to reach out to him, to connect in some way. But then I saw him walking with that cane and it brought back a flood of memories, especially the words Dad used to say. It was a reminder of everything that had happened, and I decided it was best to just drive away instead. As the years went by, we faced more losses, like Grandma passing away and then Grandpa just a few days later. They said it was from broken heart syndrome. It felt like we were losing everything. Dad couldn't even attend the funerals because he was dealing with his own struggles. It was heartbreaking to realize that, during such a difficult time, both of his sisters chose to get married in the waiting area of the hospital. They wanted Dad to be there to give them away, to be part of something joyful even amidst the pain. The impact of everything you did has been enormous on all of us. It hurts even more because you kept asking for forgiveness, wanting us to give you another chance. You didn't seem to understand that we needed time to process everything, to heal. Instead, you pressured us to make things right, all while it felt like you were just trying to ease your own conscience. You acted like everything should just return to normal without acknowledging the hurt we were all feeling. Yes, I'll admit that you tried to make things better in the later years, but you missed the crucial moments when we needed you the most. When Dad finally got out, he encouraged us to reconnect with you, saying you were a good mother and that we should show you respect. So, we tried, and for a little while, it made you happy. I even remembered what it felt like not to have anger toward you. During this time, Dad was struggling to find work, but thankfully, one of his old clients stepped in and hired him. Then, unexpectedly, the twins dropped a big surprise on you. Dad didn't want you to know he was out, so when you showed up, it really upset him. The effect was so strong that he got sick right after talking to you. He even said that just seeing you made him feel ill. Regarding your mention of that ex-wife visiting Dad, she has been coming to see him weekly for over 3 years now. They have developed a connection since he got out. So please stop dreaming about a future where you two are back together. If you truly want to talk about fixing things, reach out to me directly. What you did last week by posting about one of the worst moments in our lives was selfish. I shared this with Dad, and he doesn't really care. He said you are just the mother of his children to him and nothing more.